when I picked up this book and read it, I just felt utterly captivated by the situation and by the central character. So we follow the story of a young boy, Subi, who is of Rohingya heritage, and he's born into this detention centre in Australia. And he's never, ever experienced the world outside the detention centre. That's been his entire existence. So I think with where things are politically at the moment, in terms of how we are shifting some of our thinking around how we might treat people who are seeking sanctuary, the whole text is extremely resonant from that point of view. I think it's resonant because I believe it's the first production in the whole of Europe that actually has a Rohingya family in it. So I think it's important that people are aware of what's happened with the Rohingya specifically. But finally, I think that what is really magical and important in terms of putting this play on now is that because Subi has only ever lived in the detention centre, he has to imagine everything beyond it. And he has the most incredible imagination. And so it's just a perfect piece really to put on the stage, because theatre is all about us using our imaginations to their fullest. And theatre invites you to blow open your imagination. When you watch a really spellbinding show, it's the way that your imagination fills the spaces, if you like, that helps you make that kind of leap into empathizing with a character and, in a sense, projecting yourself into a story. And I think where we are at this time, just post-pandemic, when young people have, had in a sense a more restricted time of things than might normally be the case had we not had COVID, lockdowns, mask wearing in school, all these different things, things that haven't been able to happen. I think the imagination, to come back to the imagination as something that's just so important as part of the whole human experience, and something that should be valued, and something that we should take time to nurture, in a way, our imaginations. I think a show that has that message and that is kind of inviting us to imagine, in a way, a better world is extremely timely. I can't actually think of a more timely piece of work than this one, and I feel really, really privileged to be in this room making it. It's a conversation that started with the playwright Shakti, and we, in a way, he led the way in his vision for the first draft of the script. From very early on, we had a notion that we might use live animation in the show as well as projection. So some of what we're kind of exploring in the telling of the kind of enactment of Subi's incredible imagination is about using theatre tools, both analog and digital, kind of mixed up, to kind of really enter Subi's mind, in a way, during the show. We see a lot of things from his perspective, and you've nailed something really important in what you just said, because the show is about how important story is to all of us, and how we are defined by story, and we are actually all ultimately a story, because when we pass, you become the sum of the anecdotes people remember about you, for example. So the power of story and the importance of story to us as humans, I think, can never really be understated. And we have this character who it's very important for him to understand who he is and what his history is, why he's in here. He doesn't have that connection with a homeland because he's been born in the detention center. So as he goes around collecting all these stories, it is about him understanding who he is really, and trying to kind of help him define himself and define the man that he's going to become, if you like. So I guess that comes through very, very clearly in the script. But we use techniques, as we do in many of our shows, like multi-rolling. So we have this incredible company who play lots of different characters, who can share lots of different stories, if you like, along the way, and who give Subi artifacts to help him cling to the stories that he should remember and that he should pass on if he gets the opportunity to leave the camp. And actually there's a beautiful scene that we just worked on today with Nasir at the end of Act 1, when Nasir asks Subi to be the keeper in a way of his memory, and he gives him a special stone that he asks him to hold on to remember his story, if you like, which is a really, really powerful, moving scene. So the imagination and story are really integral to the whole show, and yeah, the kind of storytelling dimensions of the show and how we kind of realize that through the performance and the use of these different theatrical devices is, I think, something really, really magical. So the Rohingya elements of the play have come from numerous different sources. We did some very careful research initially, which was led by Ollie O'Shea in particular, who is Pilot's creative associate, and he undertook quite a lot of research into Rohingya cultural artifacts and this kind of thing. We harnessed a lot of kind of support from colleagues as well. So, for example, we started a project with Stand and Be Counted Theatre, who are the UK's first theatre company of sanctuary, and I'm very privileged that I'm on the steering group for the organisation. And we were able through them to access the Rohingya community in Bradford. They introduced us to a wonderful young man, Sirizal Islam, who's the assistant director now on the show. But in fact, we only met Sirizal for the first time a year ago. But he's had a kind of continuing involvement since that time. And Siri has brought loads to the show. Lots of, poems, anecdotes, language, specificity with costume. So we've been able to access through the relationships that we've managed to make with some of the Rohingya community, some of that content. But Shakti also, as the playwright, has written some things that are inspired as well by all of this research material and work with Siri. Siri and Shakti have co-written some parts. It's been really beautiful, actually, how all of those elements have kind of been woven in and woven through the show. So this is the fourth show that I've made for Pilot that's on this scale. And in some senses, there's a kind of, a palette of theatre things that I feel are very powerful for these kinds of big-hearted adaptations and big-hearted stories. And we say that we want to make theatre that makes the audience think harder and feel more, and that we want to make grown-up work for young audiences and meet them where we think they really are. So in a way, they're kind of like my touchstones that I hold with me all the time, those principles. I have a huge passion for movement work, and I love text, and I love work that's very, very lyrical. So in a way, what I want to do is make work, again, that blows open people's imaginations. I really think that's actually what we're here to do. Is it's, of course, about what we, how we see the story. We want to make a really compelling night for everybody, but we also want to leave that space deliberately for people to fill the gaps. So to just give you an example of that, the work that we make tends to be, or the work I make tends to be very stripped back. So, you know, I'm not going to give you everything to tell you exactly where we are in what location. The actors and I work really hard to establish those things, in a sense, through the performance work, through the movement work, through the physicality, through thinking really carefully about the story that we bring on stage as a performer, so that you don't even think about it really, but you just know we're in a canteen. You just know, you know, but there's hardly anything on stage really to tell you that. As just one example. So I think I try and hold true to certain principles, if you like, and the kinds of theatre that have inspired me. But, you know, above all things, I want to try to make something that where people get really swept up in a story, actually, that is going to really, hopefully, profoundly move them. And I would say that's kind of true every time. And one harnesses the sort of the things from the theatrical toolkit, which might be music, which, you know, on some shows. In this case, we've gone more for the visual, really, with this mask and puppetry and the AV. Although there is incredible music written by Room Ghosh, I hasten to add, but we're not using so much live music in this, and that's sometimes something I'm interested in. So it's just really, the story really leads you. It's the story really that kind of guides where you go and what the interpretation is fundamentally. So let me tell you about the mask and the puppetry. So within the story, as I told you, it's set in this detention center. There's a story within the story as well. So another character who's really important that I haven't mentioned is Jimmy, who is a girl from outside the camp. And one of the key relationships in the book and in the play is this beautiful friendship that develops between Subi and Jimmy. And Jimmy is dyslexic, and she has this incredible book that her mum gave her, and her mum has died. But she can't read the story that's in the book. And the story that's in the book is, in a sense, her heritage. So you have these two young people, neither of whom completely understand their own history, if you like. And so there's a beautiful kind of shared exchange of this reality and what it's like to be someone like that. So Subi's able to read the story to Jimmy. So they often meet at the fence and he's able to read these sections. And so theatrically, it felt like we wanted to find a different register to tell that story within the story. We wanted the audience to feel like they were stepping inside Subi's head at these points, in a way, because in a way we're kind of seeing most of the play from Subi's perspective. So it felt like, how can we create that feeling of something that's sort of slightly theatrically heightened? And we just got really excited about the idea of exploring mask. The story is relatively simple in the backstory, but there's loads of parallels with the story in the detention center, and that's deliberate, because what Zana, who's written the book, is trying to do is remind us that we all come from somewhere and we're all going somewhere, you know, and fundamentally that is part of the human experience. There aren't many people who haven't, you know, if not in their recent history, at some point in their past, a family member might have made a dangerous and treacherous journey in order for them, you know, for the next generations to have a better life or better chances. If you talk to most people, they will have some history like that in their family, actually. And the story within the story is there to remind us of that and to make that connection as well, that, you know, it doesn't matter who you are. Life, you know, there's a precarity to life. And this mask work just allows us to take, in a sense, the core idea of that story, which is so fundamental and so important, and find a different sort of visual expression for it, so it can land in the heart in a different kind of way. I guess, as I was saying before, I quite like work that's very stripped back. So in a way, often you start with the question, what do we need? You know, and I think from fairly early on, we all felt that the detention centre should be really the heart of the story. So early on, very early, we started to look at how do we put that camp on stage. And the set, as you will see when you come and see the production, is effectively a very sort of simple set with, but very beautiful, made from these bits of fences that have the kind of diamond-like configuration that's so familiar to us and that's very, very common in the camp. So there's certain things from the text and from just the decision to set everything in the camp effectively that led us down that path. But then what's interesting is it's actually a very brutal space, a detention centre. It's not a very warm space. It's pretty unforgiving. And so how then do you bring to life the imagination in such a kind of stark setting was a really important question. And Alison and Miriam together, I think it's important to say that everyone's worked very, very collaboratively. So sometimes it's really hard to say, well, one person's work ends and another person begins. I think that's the reality of these kinds of processes. But Alison has led the creation of the masks and the puppets and the things that you'll see throughout the play. And they kind of exist in three different ways, because we have the masks from the story within the story. We have also some puppets that are kind of in the real world. So there's a moment where a sparrow flies into the camp, for example, which is quite profound. And that is really there. But then we also have this amazing character who's called Duck. And that's a plastic duck that a character called Harvey brings into the camp one day when he brings this paddling pool. And Subi, in a way, in his imagination, brings this duck to life. So we also have a puppet, which is a duck, who is effectively a speaking character who tracks us through the story. And there are moments, therefore, that are a little surreal, if you like, that are these moments when Subi and the duck are talking to one another. But it's intended to be a manifestation of his imagination, if you like. So there's some stuff that's quite, you know, quite kooky and sort of stretching reality in all sorts of different directions in the play. But that's to express or to give full expression to this young man's mind and his imagination and the kind of things that are firing off for him when he has very little to do and only his imagination at his disposal, actually. Subi, in a sense, starts the play very innocently. He is a very reactive character, so he sort of reacts to things around him, but his real, you know, drive is to draw and to try and capture things and to kind of get lost in the world of his imagination. And because he has that quality as a character, he is, in a way, terribly sweet in a way. He's terribly particular in a way, because he's very much, you might say, on his own planet in a sense. And so, you know, there's a quality of innocence. There's a quality of, you know, being in his own space in a way and it's up to, I think what's important to say is it's up to you to interpret why he's like that. So it might be that he's like that because what around him is actually quite brutal. And it's a way of escaping from some of the harsher realities of the things that are going on around him. Or it might be that that's just how he is, you know, and that he has that kind of character in the first place, or some kind of mix of the two. I think that's up to you to decide to some extent when you watch it. But over the events of the play, in our version of the story, he's 12. So he's on the cusp of adulthood, really. And how he develops over the play is that he encounters things that challenge that core identity that he's kind of built around him to protect himself, and also to you know, where he feels safe. Actually, it's where he feels safe when he's drawing and when he's you know, just reacting to the joy in the camp, because there are moments of joy, and that there's music and there's moments where the community come together, for example. So it's not all relentlessly grim. You know, he does have these really joyful exchanges with other characters that he holds to, but he must face some of the realities of what may happen to him in the near future. And that, in a sense, is done through this incredible character called Eli, who is a young man of Somali heritage, and he's just those few years older than Subi. And so he's starting to be treated very differently because he's a man effectively, or he's becoming a man very rapidly. So Subi gets to see what happens to him, and that impacts Subi, and Subi needs to change because of that, in order to stand up for himself in the future, if you like. And that's kind of the core journey of the play. It's a very simple one in some senses, and it's very poignant to watch, but there's still a huge amount of hope, I think, in Subi, and he's just a really wonderful character. He's just great. Well, I think, as I've already said, you know, I think we have more in common than that which sets us apart, to quote the late Jo Cox. I think that's a really important thing that I think about a lot, and I seem to always think about when we're making these productions. I think that's a really important message that pilots work often, you know, holds. That's also how we make work. We deliberately make work with lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds. It's a deliberate gesture to do that. We always have people from different heritages in our shows all at the same time. So there's a sense of a shared experience and finding the things that are common and that are, you know, true for all of us as universal human experiences. So that's a really important message. And another really important message is, you know, in the final scene of the play, I don't kind of want to spoil the play if you haven't seen it, but there's a really important shift in Subi. He's faced with a choice that he can take about how he chooses to respond to something, which is effectively a moment where he can take a stand on something. And I think often we can feel very powerless in our lives, and feel that, you know, we can't make changes, it's too scary to speak up. And it's such a courageous moment in the play. So I think a message as well is that, you know, you can act, there are things that you can do, you can speak out about things. And yeah, you know, there is a lot more that all of us can do, really. Sometimes we get tricked into thinking that we can't do much about specifically these issues, actually. But there's a lot of things that we can do, including supporting, you know, charities, people who are supporting, sanctuary seekers, signing petitions, writing to MPs, going on protests. There's such a wealth of things that we can do. We do have a lot more power than we often are led to believe is the case. So I think that's a message of the play as well, that, never feel that you can't do something about this stuff, because there's always something you can do, even if it's just a really small thing. It still counts, it's still something.